So we thought with this quite accomplished group in the room, we'd be neglecting our responsibility if we didn't consider how badges can be applied to marginalized conversations. And to some degree, this has been a conversation we've all been having over the last 2 days about a kind of elite first world problem, right? How do we give higher education learners credit for what they're learning at expensive, sometimes state-sponsored, sometimes private colleges and universities, and on into their careers? But really, don't we have a responsibility to consider more deeply the role that badges and e-portfolios might have in addressing education, credentialing, or societal needs for populations at risk? So this all came together very quickly, and I apologize if there's a rather ad hoc feel to this. But I wanted to assemble some thought leaders up here to kind of prime the pump, and then Serge had the great idea to throw this back as a roundtable activity and get the experts in the room, all of you, to kind of share ideas around this. So the way I thought this might work, and first I'll have this group talk about that core question to kind of, again, get the ideas flowing, but really think about a population, a problem that that population has, what the need is, considering the range of all of the services, education, assessment, credentialing, and then maybe have groups come back and share their ideas, and hopefully foster collaboration among people in the room, because all of us are probably aware of one project or two projects, and perhaps we can work together to try and move the needle on some of those things. So let me go back to the top question and ask the panel. Can you think of a role for badges or e-portfolios in thinking about the needs, education, credentialing, finding a job, getting a job, identifying education opportunities of these marginalized populations? Who wants to start?
I'm happy to start.
Leila.
I'll just go back to the presentation that I shared earlier this week and really talk about, to frame this conversation, talk about kind of 3 areas that we're focusing on and that I've heard different ideas around in this room. So I believe that this community not only has the responsibility to be thinking about the strategy around digital badges that serve and benefit all young people, but also has had some really interesting pilots and concepts already in place. So there are kind of 3 things that we really think about when it comes to low-income population, marginalized youth, refugees, first-generation immigrants. Number 1 is access. So being able to find the learning opportunities, really understand where they are, what they look like, and take advantage of them, which sometimes requires infrastructure like technology, is key. We know that across our cities and online, there's a wealth of learning opportunities, and we've all been talking about this information and knowledge and technological advancement, the world in which we live, yet at the same time, less than 20% of this is visible to some of our low-income youth. So the first thing to be thinking about as you're designing badges and as you're connecting these learning opportunities is there awareness among some of the most marginalized populations. The second aspect is engagement. Engagement doesn't necessarily mean just throwing content online and hoping it will be interesting for kids and it will be also self-explanatory. In fact, we know that young people who don't have a support network, parents or mentors, actually require some support. They require having peers to share the same interests or guidance to help them really take full advantage of these opportunities. So really thinking about what's the context in which these digital badges and these learning opportunities exist. Is there an opportunity to bring this not only closer to the young people, but also provide the support, a mentor to help guide the learning experience? And the third aspect, and this is related to the currency topic, really paying attention to establishing badges as currency, both with the post-secondary institutions for high school kids, because the dropout rate, for example, in the US is 1 out of 5 don't even make it to college to take advantage of some of these great opportunities that we've been talking about. Number two, across the world, it's 263 million young people that are currently not in school. So really thinking about what can badges do to break through some of these institutional barriers that are locking too many of our young people out of these opportunities and also pursuing what they're interested in. Can they take the badges, put them on their college application, financial aid application, and have the opportunity to pursue their interest in the context of a university? The same is true for the employers. So again, accepting badges on the job applications. There are a couple of things that we're doing with multinational companies to get them in the instances where there's no high school diploma or GED in the US or college diploma, where the badges become meaningful signals of somebody's readiness for an entry-level job. And I'll emphasize also the importance, we haven't talked about the types of jobs. It's important that we are thinking about jobs that are not low-wage, dead-end jobs, but jobs that actually have paths to the future success. So I'll pause here. Thank
Good.
you.
Thank you. Dominique? Looks like you had some ideas there.
I'm Dominique Giguere from MSF Canada, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. And thank you for the opportunity, which did sound very good after a few glasses of wine last night. But that's what we do at MSF. We respond on the spot. And I'm here with colleagues from MSF Brussels, MSF Paris, MSF Spain. And as you know, we're not an academic institution. We're not set up for giving credentials to people, and nor should we be spending a huge amount of resources to track, to plan, and recognize the development and all the learning that happens. And yet we know there's a huge amount of learning. The learning that happens in our projects and mission is not the learning that could ever happen in school. So a Canadian surgeon who goes to a mission in South Sudan will never be trained for the resource-limited setting he or she will be working in. But how do you recognize that? So, and our resources need to go to the beneficiaries and not, to human resources development and the huge infrastructure around human resources. So very quickly, I thought I would exemplify with just 4 profiles so you know who we're dealing with. And the fact that we also have underserved population, because MSF is 35,000 staff, so it's a workforce, a global workforce, 70% of which is national staff. So they are in country, working in their own cities, their own country. So we often think of MSF as, the expat that gets, deployed on mission, but we actually have a really underserved population. So very quickly, so let's say there's Chris, who is, he has a chemistry degree, but he's become a water sanitation expert. He's been deployed across several agencies. So he's worked for Red Cross, for UNICEF, and for MSF. And he's worked in resource-limited settings and also conflict zones. You also have, meanwhile, you have Carol in the Brussels office, who's an HR pool manager, and she needs tomorrow to deploy 100 people because there's a cholera outbreak after the hurricane in Haiti. Meanwhile, we also have Alima, who's a nurse, and she's in South Sudan. She's reached the top education that she can get in her own country, but she's been working for over 5 years. She's basically been running an HIV/TB clinic on behalf of MSF, but MSF had to close the clinic because of increased violence. So she's now unemployed with no recognition. She can't access additional education in her own country, yet she knows that there are scholarships available more and more in Europe for immigrants, for refugees, but how does she get recognition for essentially running an HIV/TB clinic for the last 5 years? And she's been coached by medical experts from Europe. And lastly, there's Musaid, who's from Syria. He's a surgeon. He actually was working in a hospital, MSF hospital in Afghanistan. It was bombed. He's now moved to Lebanon with his family. He's a refugee, and all he has is his mobile phone, the clothes on his back, and would like to practice and contribute to the refugee camp. So this is our population, yeah. And we feel that, so we've been on the journey with badges, starting with Don Prezant back in Geneva in 2014. We've been exploring last year at the conference in Barcelona, and this year we're getting really close. We're at the proposal stage, and I hope next year we'll be back with a presentation about a pilot project, because it makes so much sense. We see that the badge can have multiple dimensions, so that you can not only capture my professional profile as a surgeon, as a nurse, as a logistician, but a surgeon who has practiced in resource-limited settings in a specific country for a specific outbreak of disease. So that as the HR pool manager, I can search, okay, who has done Ebola in 2014? Because they know the latest guidelines and protocols, and do a search like that. The badge gives us that dynamic.
So, listening to you speak, I work a lot with David, obviously, and it sounds to me like David's Global Skills Registry. Did any of you hear the same thing here? Just a slightly different use case. Yeah. Phil, Serge?
Well, I was just going to, the description that is being provided reminds us that this really needs to be an environment that allows for the kind of organic development that we can't predict. This is not sort of the kind of thing where we can come up with a metadata structure in advance in some closet in Berkeley or Oxford or Paris, and then fill in the fields associated with the experiences that Doctors Without Borders are providing. Because in fact, it's the interaction, it's the relationships that are built that in fact define the value of what the data are that need to be there. So it gives us an opportunity to rethink the way in which we capture this information. I mean, a lot of this can be captured if the person has a mobile phone and there's any possibility of geo-coordinates associated with the mobile phone's location. There's a lot of data we can capture without having to impose on the particular individual to do that in a structured, consistent way. So it does two things from my perspective. One, it's emphasizing to me this notion of organic bidirectional endorsements as an essential quality that describes effectively a multidimensional fingerprint, a multidimensional identity, the identity of which is the combination of the various nodes and vectors that are pointing to you and that you point to. That gives you a combination of who you are and the skills and contexts that are uniquely from your experience. And until we can get a way to represent that sort of three-dimensional construct as essentially a connected, what I guess George Siemens would call a connectivism map. We will be able, when we have that, to be able to provide the kind of searchability of a resource that actually can connect people with the right kinds of expertise and not necessarily have to go up and down hierarchies to do so.
If we think in terms of social intervention, maybe it would be worthwhile to consider collective badges, collective achievement badges, because we tend to look at badges as something that is earned by an individual. But how about a community that has some problems to solve? They need to create a team in order to solve the problem. They have an achievement, and then there is a badge, achievement badge, the same which is given to everybody. So it's a recognition of some achievement. And most achievements are collective achievements. It means when I do something, even if I earn the badge for me, it's because I've been working with other people. So if I look at my town in Joigny, Burgundy, where almost 60% of the people live on social subsidies, so there is a high level of unemployment, yet there are so many things that could be done collectively. And so we could use badges as indicators of where we ought to go, and people could subscribe to them and say, yes, I want to participate in that, and then when it is achieved, then the evidence of the achievement will be, the thing itself. I'm thinking about between our town and the next town, there is a river, and the path has not been maintained for years. And yet it would be a way for people to circulate, use bicycles, or instead of using car to move from one village to the next. That could be an achievement. That could be where people who are today unemployed, who live on public subsidies, could participate in and be recognized for that. So thinking of badges for social intervention could be something interesting to consider.
And facilitating this sort of community organization. Self-organization.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Bernard's talk about earlier this week about trying to really begin to look at the networks of badge earners and make them discoverable to each other, right? Almost Tinder for badge earners, if you will, right?
Yes.
I'm trying to assemble a team to solve my community problem. How do I know the people in my community who've got the skills I need on my team? At any age.
So
that's
I do
right.
want to emphasize the fact that we've
Yeah.
been talking quite a bit about university level and employment. We really need to look at any age, just given that a lot of our youth drop out of the system and they're lost to us before they even reach college. In the U.S., I'll share one statistic. So yes, 1 out of 5 drops out of high school. In the U.S., 75% of the incarcerated, so prison population, are high school dropouts. So we're talking about school to prison pipeline. So we need to start early with the badging.
Yeah. Okay, so I think this should be the interactive part now, right? We've kind of primed the pump a little bit.
I'd love to hear
Yeah,
a couple of
let's
ideas.
start this by getting some ideas out from those. You've heard us kind of opine about this, but let's hear you go ahead and toss out a few ideas for problem spots that you think that might be applicable, and then maybe self-organize ourselves into areas where we're interested in that problem or this one. So consider some of these populations of your own. Who's got one? Where's the?
I wrote it down because I think some of these things are, you need to be careful to get on a discussion, but if we're talking about worldwide job mobility, it's like the first world multinational way of doing it is expats and worst case gated communities. If you do job mobility in the other direction, it's based on shortage of certain profiles in the first world, so then you can have some kind of job mobility. So what I see is that if you, with the efforts they're doing to get a more worldwide digitalization, I see it as a more, maybe a solution to the problem to get a real two-way inclusive interaction. Because when you don't need to care about political hot potatoes like open borders and things like that. You can have job mobility online. And I see that if all the efforts of getting good internet connection worldwide, not only in Bologna in this room, but worldwide good internet connection, we can have internet everywhere, and then we can have badges everywhere also. I was just wondering, what is your opinion on that? How does this open badges relates to the fact that we don't have internet access? So not everybody is digitalized. Also for the cities of learning, I was wondering when you gave the presentation, all the people in the city that are not online, or how do you solve that problem?
Yeah, and that's also one of the reasons why, I'll just take this last part, and obviously everybody has probably perspective on the first question. So specific to the cities, the reason why we are in the cities is to solve for access, and access could be just plain visibility into the learning opportunities. Second is infrastructure, access to a computer to even see one of the XPs or playlists. So we are partnering with everybody from museums to libraries, and libraries in the US are known to be in some of the most impoverished areas. So I mentioned Southside Chicago. So libraries are there. They're a safe space to do a couple of things. One is meet with the peers that share the same interests. Two is access the infrastructure. It could be a computer, but it could be also resource, a person to talk to in order to complete your learning experience. So again, it's thinking about this blended model, online and offline, that is critical. That's an example in the cities of learning. Clearly, there are many places around the world where there's no internet access, and we need to be solving for that.
Although, I'm always surprised by this, right? The widespread use of the phone in places where people don't have access otherwise. So I think access is one of those issues that can be a discussion stopper if we let it bog us down. Let's set it aside for a moment. We obviously need to work at that. There may be other strategies we can employ, and certainly face-to-face learning is a good one for that, because we can document that with badges as easily as we can an online experience. But other ideas? Oh, go ahead.
Well, just to respond to, I think what I'm drawing from that is a renewed attention to systems that work in disconnected formats, so that they can gather information while they're not connected. Whether that's just audio information, something that you pin to your chest and narrate things that you've done or you're doing or who you're talking to or what have you. And then when you happen to be in a position where there is connectivity, that can be uploaded and managed.
The data capture technologies have never been more pervasive than they are now.
Right. Yeah. But we've sort of forgotten this because of the push for universal connectivity. We've forgotten the fact that there's still huge populations for which intermittent access remains the norm.
Yeah, and there's some apps that enable offline experience too.
So since it's the last day, I'll save my most controversial comments for now, so I can run away if people don't like what I say. But I was public about this. I wrote an article in the Chronicle of Higher Ed this last year where I alluded to this and Evolution, the blog. But I'll be so bold as to say that it's morally irresponsible for schools to establish themselves as the gateways to opportunity. We've created a credentialing system, and we've communicated a message, like within the United States in particular, that the pathway to success is to go to school and to stay in school. And if you don't, you will fail. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I certainly think that schools play a critical role in societies and in many different parts of the world. But part of the reason I'm excited about the role of badges is that I truly do see them as an opportunity to expand our vision to education and not just schooling. This is back to Ivan Illich days and that sort of thing. There's a wonderful, Western Sydney University they had a home run with this great little marketing campaign last year where they tell the story of a boy at age 6 in Sudan who was taken away from his family and forced into being a child soldier, and he was later shot, and they snuck him out of the country. He ended up in Australia, taught himself to read as a teenager, and long story short, he goes to Western Sydney University, and now and is now a refugee lawyer. And an incredible story. Imagine what would happen, though, if we created these restrictive systems in our schools, which we do sometimes, that said, well, wait a second. How are you we're not going to let you into our university. You didn't go to system. Where did you go to 8th grade? Where did you go to 7th grade, right? So for us to that's when I talked in my keynote about gateways versus pathways. My hope is that we can leverage badges to create multiple pathways, not to diminish the value of schools, but to simply amplify the core vision of schools, which is education for all.
Other thoughts?
I won't be able to gracefully follow up what Bernard just said, but I do want to add to that. Also, by starting to remind folks who may not know this, that 6 years ago, about 6 years ago when badges started, it was for this very reason. Badges weren't created to replicate the existing diploma system and certificate system. They were created to recognize learning that could happen anywhere at any time in any way. And prior to the Cities of Learning work, there were programs that were working that the students were doing after-school learning or credit learning to account for schooling, keep them in school, that were working very well that badges enhanced. And the students didn't care so much about the badges. What they cared about were those experiences where they learned things that would add to the quality of their life and encourage them to stay in school. And one example was a program I was part of in Providence, Rhode Island in the States called the Hub. It's the high school program. And these students were taking after-school programs like learning web development, engineering, urban debate, and they just helped design these programs. So their participation was very important. They designed what the badges would be, what they would earn the badges before. And they brought in their peers and really encouraged each other to stay in school and do their thing. So I said a lot there. But, so just to recap a little bit, like badges were meant for this. Right? Meant for this reason originally. And then also you have to bring the participation of the participants. Wasn't so gracefully said, but I think you probably get what I'm saying.
There was another perspective over here, I think.
Thank you. Hi, Geoffroy from Montreal, Canada. One group of population we don't speak a lot is about elders. All those people, we have some here, and I'm going to be one someday. So I would like to stay in the civic society. I will to stay actively, and the badge solution can be applied about that. It's a movement. In our living lab community in Montreal, we're starting for 2 years now. A platform about to make workshop and understand how the silver economy. It's a way for a gray economy, but it's better to say silver economy. But it's a lot of opportunities to create learning or capacity or recognize effort or mentorship for elders to stay active in the society. So for me, this is at the other opposite about the young and professional life. It's about how can we keep people inside the active world. My mom went in my little kid in the Fab Lab, and they print an object together. So it's not just for the next generation; it's to stay active as a humanity. And in the West world, we have a lot of elders right now, so we have to challenge these issues, and maybe badges can help to social innovation about it.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the SCORE program in the United States, which is the Service Corps for Retired Executives, which they basically provide mentors and guides for young entrepreneurs.
Sorry for those that heard the story before, but this is a story of a teacher in a primary school in the suburb of Paris, Orly. A pupil said, "I can't learn." And what did she do in order to make the pupils understand that they could learn something? If I speak again to an instructor, to a designer, will say, "Oh, I'll teach a person something easy, and they will discover they can learn something." What did she do instead? She said, "Teach me something. You know something. You know a recipe, you know how to play soccer, you know a story, so you can teach me something." So again, it is a process of recognition. And like that was created the Réseau des échanges réciproques de savoir, Reciprocal Knowledge Exchange Network. And it starts by that, it starts by recognizing the other. If you want to have the people learn, don't tell them that they don't know anything, that they can't learn. Tell them, teach me something.
Can I just explore the population, which is actually particularly difficult? If we just imagine kids who've been in drugs and alcohol, unmarried mothers, those sort of people who sort of drop out for several years, and they are not inspired for learning, how do we bring them back into the fold and give them gateways or pathways into what we're talking about? They have no sense of value of what a badge is. They have no knowledge of how to use the systems we put before them, and they may have no physical access to use the systems. Could I ask the panel to think about that?
I'm happy to start. Putting the access question off to the side, assuming that there is some infrastructure, a library or a place for them to access the experiences, I'll make the case for allowing the kids to explore and discover who they are. And we oftentimes focus on the wrong things, which is certificates, badges, seat time, and not necessarily for discovering what you're into and who you are as a person. I was doing a demo prior to this session and really showcasing what some of our cities are doing to allow kids to, through these XPs or experiences, to sample everything from 3D design to coding to fashion, music, and before committing to learn something and go through a whole playlist and earn a badge. So again, providing that space to discover and explore and to formulate what their passion might be to reflect on that. And then giving them the opportunity to master what they're most interested in and earn a badge. So again, badge is not be all end all. It's an opportunity to provide evidence for the learning that can happen anywhere and any time. But it is important to pay attention to this, again, context in which badges exist and what is it that a person, a young person, elderly person needs in order to feel fulfilled. And it is having, again, access to the peers that share the same interests, opportunity to explore and discover their passions, and ultimately earn a badge that will help them unlock future opportunities. So,
let me just quickly follow up on that and say that I think we would be foolish to think that our particular hammer is the solution to every problem. So in the case of someone that is in a situation where they feel hopeless, they may be addicted to some substance, they may have an absolutely horrific home life, etc. I'm not sure that focusing on the badge is the first point of contact that I would have with that group. That said, the question, it's much aligned with what Serge had referenced earlier. These people still exist in a network of connections and relationships and people. And not everybody may, in fact, be in the same state of hopelessness, the same state of despair that they might be in. And it may be that the indirect approach is the only reasonable approach in a context like that, which is to reach out to the parts of that person's network that might be able to reverberate back some things of help. But at some point, Maslow's hierarchy of needs actually has to then be recognized.
So my question was kind of back to the college gatekeepers and being the single source. Everything you read says that about 65% of the jobs in 2020 will require some sort of college experience, college courses or college degree. So how do you reconcile that, or what do you do about that, and how do you reconcile open badges with, again, these lack of opportunities for kids going into college, and why should college be the gatekeeper? And what do you do to change that stat?
Well, actually, I want to turn that question to you, being the representative of the employers, and they're the ones who are actually determining that the job should require a college degree when there are actually a number of jobs even today that should not require a college degree.
Well, the majority of the jobs that are growing, like in the United States, are in healthcare. And we have a growing governance mentality, I think, in the world, that everybody has to be licensed to do anything. So that, in the United States, is a very big problem. We're very heavily regulated. You have to have a license to, there have been people that have been thrown in jail because they didn't have a license to braid hair, right? So that's the bigger problem. And IBM, by the way, is changing that. A lot of the job descriptions we have at IBM don't even ask for a degree. I mean, in my own department, my manager, Donna, who you know, stripped off any degrees. She says, I just want to know qualifications, I want to know capabilities. I don't care where they got it. But there is a licensing issue all over the globe saying you can't even drive a taxi without having a license.
Thank you very much for a great panel. I just want to maybe push back a little bit on that last comment about regulation. In the U.S., one of the problems we've had, I think, in the last 10 years is a lack of regulation. Lack of regulation on banks, on higher ed. You look what's happening with the student loan crisis, with our mortgage crisis. Like, regulation could have helped some of the despair we're in. So I'm a little bit, when I hear the idea of, completely deinstitutionalizing, I think about our history of the last 10 years, and I get worried. Like, I'm not convinced that's a solution to anything.
So building on that, I see value in regulation as well. So whenever I talk about multiple pathways, I'm not talking about deregulating everything. I prefer to have a surgeon who knows what she's doing if she were conducting surgery on me, right? The question is it possible for us to create an ecosystem where there are a larger variety of ways to meet the standards? And I've worked I've consulted for healthcare institutions, especially in the continuing ed spaces where they're beginning to think about it, where for example, right now, in order to remain a healthcare professional in some fields in healthcare in the United States, all you have to do is show up at a really nice resort and sit in a session as people pitch products to you. Now I'm oversimplifying, but that's a reality. There's no new competence. There's research to indicate that healthcare professionals in some fields in the U.S., after they've been in practice for 10 to 15 years, actually slowly decline in the quality of their service and their effectiveness. And so what's happening now is realizing that simply sitting in a course isn't adequate, and they're reimagining how they're going to hold their own professionals to a certain standard to meet that quality of service, right? So as they're beginning to think about that, my question for them, and has been directly to some of these organizations, is why not go back and do the same thing for entry into the professions? Maintain this highest standards as you need for the good of the majority of people, but let's get rid of those really strict gateways. You have to pay this amount of money or go to this specific place in order to get there.
So I do feel like I should step in for Dan Hickey. Dan, are you in the room? Is he gone? So Dan would have something to say here from a psychometrician's perspective about psychometrically valid, legally defensible assessments. John.
Hi. So, I've been trying to think something coherent to say. So, the Open University, which has existed since the late 60s, is a university which is not a gateway. So, from our word open, you do not need any badges or credentials to come to us. So I think we maybe end up thinking, do we need to continue the Bologna model of education, which was established quite a while ago in our university system? Universities and schools do not need to have this. And I think the reason why it works is because we disaggregated the creation of learning materials from the teaching of learning materials. And then we have this Uber-style hiring process to have others teach with very high-quality materials. So I think part of the problem is the fact that universities are using a particular model which they don't seem to want to jump out of.
Yeah.
So there are ways possible. And we currently have 180,000 students. We could have 250,000. We have high numbers of students with disadvantaged backgrounds.
So do students at the Open University have the ability to earn partial credit, or are they going only for the degree?
No, you can do a single course. You can do short courses. There are mapping to the they do care about the accreditation. Even from our free materials, if they're bad, as for the IBM presentation, the numbers go up. So one of the things that one of the vice chancellors, John Daniels, said was he was most proud that we broke the link between quality and exclusivity. So you do not need to have that link to add value.
So the population that I'm thinking about is refugees. mainly because I believe that is not just a trendy topic, but within my own lifespan, will probably one of the most influential things that will stick with me. And I think the need would be that of social integration, or, as I think about it, maybe social augmentation. Now, you come into a country as refugees and you're labeled as refugees. So you could see a label as nothing but a badge. But that label is very weak in its made-up data, and certainly is completely missing of the evidence. And it's ironic that one of the most challenging things of the modern times in this refugee situation also really carries, I think, in a nutshell, some of the solutions and the resources that we need for the future. And I'm talking about some of the skills that these refugees have to develop in their transition, in their migrations. Now, one of the most life-changing experiences in my life, and also as a recognized experience, learning experience, very valuable, was studying abroad, traveling. In Europe, we have the Erasmus program, which has created the Erasmus generations, and we hear from employers that people that have had that experience are more desirable. That's a 6-month fun experience in Barcelona, I'd say. And that really develops those soft skills or those attitudes like versatility, empathy, some resilience, because it's probably the first time that you live abroad. But think about those skills. I mean, the skills that these refugees have to develop in their migration. How can you teach resilience or empathy if you have not experienced it? So I think a badge, in the case of refugees, could help if, as a way to really empower someone or to give the opportunity to these people to tell their stories. What's the best way to teach? To tell a story. Oftentimes we don't hear the stories and we just label them without looking at the evidence. So I think this could, maybe a good instrument, for the millennials, for the new generation to, allow them to speak up and to capture that evidence, which for many could be a very good lesson, a very good lesson for, those things that are really hard to teach. Again, empathy, resilience, mindfulness, those things that now, the top execs are looking for. And, how can you tell? How can you learn? Either you go in a camp or you just do some volunteer work. So I think there is, some of the challenges of today could also be, the skills of the future.
I like the way you've turned that on its head.
Yeah, could I just add to that, just having experienced that myself as a former refugee, having been in a refugee camp and taught in a refugee camp and received no recognition for that. What you are highlighting is this notion that learning can happen anywhere in any context, and that also there is an opportunity through the badges to capture and recognize that learning. So this notion of what counts as learning and where we can issue the recognition of learning is something that badges can support. And also just to add, in terms of the refugees, with over 60 million people displaced, we're talking about a large population and something that, again, as a digital badging, open badging community, something we can be thinking about addressing with digital badges. It's similar to youth out of school. There's this other population that has incredible skills, could have incredible skills, and should be given an opportunity, and badges, the way they're being constructed, could provide that.
Good. Well, I think this has been quite a rich discussion. Does anybody have any sort of last projects they're thinking of right now that they want to make others aware of and request their help? Are any of you working on interesting things for this type of population and you want to invite others to join? Anyway, I'll leave that open to you, and that could be a lunchtime discussion. But thanks, everybody, for engaging with us.